It's hour two here on the White House Brief Channel with Paul Westcott. I am he. So good to have you here with us. Joining us now on the program. We're so excited every single time he comes on. He not only explains the issues of the day, but he talks about the ideology behind it, which is so much more important. It's the fundamental, the root cause of the problems we have in America. Ron Paul likes to talk about it. Joining us now on the phone, Dr. Congressman Ron Paul. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
So good to have you. And, you know, I was just actually reading through, I said we're going to have two contrasting viewpoints here. I read one of Eugene Robinson's pieces talking about demanding the impossible, which was a $61 billion cut, which he called ridiculously impossible. Was that a ridiculously impossible number, Congressman?
I guess for him, if you believe in freedom and limited government, no, it's not anything at all. I mean, that's minor. Of course, it's a step in the right direction, but it's rather minor compared to a national debt that's going up at the rate of $2 trillion a year. I mean,
right.
the liberals believe that, you know, everything depends on consumers spending money. So if you go into debt and the economy slows up because the consumer's running out of money or government's running out of money, what you do is you spend more money.
Right.
And just dig a hole deeper for ourselves. And unfortunately, we've been doing that not just during this recession, but we've been doing it for quite a few decades, and that's why we have such a huge mess right now.
Now, Congressman, you wrote a piece, The Nanny State Can't Last, and we talk about that here all the time. Obviously, you're not focusing, you're not going after people who are on welfare, who are on food stamps, but really it's the providers of these sort of programs, meaning the federal government of the United States. Can you explain your stance here?
Well, you know, it's easy to be trapped, as conservatives frequently are. They know there's a mess. They know they have to cut back. So they say, well, what we need to do is cut food stamps for the poor and maybe medical care. Those are unconstitutional, and someday we hope we deal with that. But I'd like to address the fact that the government is involved. They've been buying votes this way, and they've been getting away with deficit financing and printing press money. But conservatives very rarely, if ever, talk about the militarism that we're involved in, the $1.2 trillion we spend, and that's a welfare system too for the military-industrial complex. So I politically, I think that's easier to address than saying, well, what we have to do is go after NPR. And the one day we had a vote on NPR as well as continuing the war in Afghanistan. Of course, I voted against both of them, but I was critical of those who would vote against NPR, go home and say, look, we're doing something. At the same time, they endorse a war that's been going on for 10 years and looks like it's never going to end.
I mean, it's unbelievable, and I want to talk about that Afghanistan in a second here, but I mean, honestly, I mean, there's money being spent all over the place, and several solutions, I guess, have been written up now, including Barack Obama's plan, which is set to be introduced tomorrow, and of course, and we're going to wait on the details of that one, but also Paul Ryan's plan. What do you think about that? $6.2 trillion. It's still obviously not enough to satiate a lot of people. Does that include yourself?
No, it wouldn't be enough because the balance budget on his program comes out in about the year 2040. So that's not good enough. We'll have the end of the nanny state before then because we'll eventually just destroy the dollar. Right. So I'm not very optimistic that will do it. But at least the discussion is a little bit better. But I think the problem is that we have everybody looking at this as a budgetary problem or an arithmetic problem, and that if we just cut here and waste and fraud and move around, I think it's bigger than that. I think it has to. We have to deal with the foreign policy that we have. Can we sustain it? How about the domestic policy of welfareism, which really takes care of the wealthy more than it takes care of the poor? And I think that has to be addressed. And the budgetary thing is secondary, sort of like tax. Taxes are secondary. I don't like the income tax. I'd do away with it and all this. But the tax issue is secondary to the spending issue, and as long as the liberals have the upper hand, and Keynesian economics is a liberal philosophy, but it's been endorsed by both parties for a long, long time, and that is the government's responsible for spending money and borrowing money and printing money. But today, though, we're getting a lot more people challenging that system and challenge the Federal Reserve System that accommodates the big spender. If you didn't have the Federal Reserve, this would have ended a long time ago because interest rates would have skyrocketed, and Congress would have had to quit spending because they would have been responsible, for the high interest rates. But as long as the Fed can keep interest rates low and the world still trusts us because we are still the powerhouse and they trust our money, this thing will continue. I think these budgetary debates are just not relevant to the real problem, and we're marching on to the conclusion of the problem because this recession is not going to be resolved like other recessions. This recession is going to be resolved with a depression, and I think we're in the early stages of that.
Wow. So, I mean, it sounds like to me, and let me see if I can sum up the philosophy. I know it's hard to do that, but it sounds like we've got corporate welfare, we've got social welfare for individuals, and then there's some kind of defense mechanism welfare that's going on, the amount of money we're spending overseas to keep the U.S. military-industrial complex. And that doesn't just include Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Pakistan, wherever else we are actively, but Germany and Japan and places that have been safe for a lot of years. And we're still spending money there.
South Korea, the whole works. And the more we've been involved, the more chaotic these countries have become. We had to leave under dire circumstances Vietnam. But Vietnam is on their own. We don't give them subsidies. We trade with them. We invest over there, and they come over here. And that was a terrible conclusion of a decade of disaster. And yet the consequences have not been as bad as they had claimed. And yet in Korea, the country is divided. And just think of the killing that goes on in the Middle East. We fought this war in Iraq, and everybody's happy with the consequences of Iraq. But Iraq actually has been delivered to the Iranians. I mean, the Shiites that run Iraq are allies with the Iranians. It makes no sense. So, but I'm just hoping that we can present the case for what we should replace the system with, but we cannot patch this system up. That is what I'm convinced of.
No, I don't expect a straight answer on this one. I mean, even from you, sir, but I mean, you're the king of straight answers in Washington, in my opinion. But I think right now, I spoke to a legal expert last week, somebody Bruce Fein, a former Reagan DOJ official, and he said Barack Obama, because of what he did in Libya, needs to be brought up on articles of impeachment. What do you think about something like that? I mean, because of what we've done in Libya, going in and basically creating a new doctrine saying that for humanitarian reasons, we can enter any country in the world, and that would include up to 90 countries, right. Mr. Fein asserted. What do you think about that?
Well, I think what he did was atrocious, and I think what other presidents have done have been atrocious. But we have had a mental change in this country that we tolerate what our presidents do in taking us to war. So, yes, I consider it very unconstitutional. If the mood of the country was right, a person like this would be impeached, and yet we're not even close to that. But Republicans and Democratic presidents have done this alike. I mean, Truman was the first one to do this, and they defy and they say, well, we get our marching orders from the UN and this sort of thing. But I see it as an intellectual fight that we have to change attitudes, and if we had the right understanding of the proper role of government, the people wouldn't be electing people, to go to Washington and do exactly the opposite, and then we wouldn't have to face this. So it's the change of those attitudes that I think is far superior to the fact that, if you bring up impeachment charges and you get 5 votes, it more or less confirms that the American people love these wars, and it actually backfires on you.
Right. And lastly here, sir, what do you think? I mean, we're talking about changing the mood of the country, not just on, wars overseas and social programs and things like that. How do you feel right now about this Congress and their ability to actually change minds? Because it was said in the Wall Street Journal right after election 2010 happened that there's 2 things that this Congress can do. One of them is they can vote to cut back on spending and really do anything they can as 1/3 of the federal government. The other thing is to be able to step up and state the case for why conservative values, and really those sort of libertarian conservative values that you espouse, why they should be dominant among the American discussion. Do you think this Congress has done either of those?
No, but they want to and they try to, but it's too major. I look at it in medical terms like trying to treat an addict. The addict always wants to reform, but they have to get to the bottom before they make that decision. We're not at the bottom, which means that we have to bite the bullet and do what we can to save our own lives. But there's a lot of people talking about it, but the withdrawal symptoms are significant for those who have been benefiting. I tell the crowds that I speak to, I said, they tell us that we have to sacrifice to solve these problems. I said, what if I got rid of the income tax, got the government off your back and out of your life? And I said, would you feel like you're sacrificing no more no-win wars and all these things that we do and going to airports under the Patriot Act and this kind of stuff? And they don't think they'd have to sacrifice anything.
Right.
So, but right now,
Unreal.
The people who are in charge would feel like they're losing a lot, and they would, but they're the ones who deserve to lose.
There you go. Congressman Ron Paul, always fantastic talking to you here on the White House Brief. We appreciate the time.
Thank you.